Hey everybody, thanks for joining for the special anniversary edition of Get In Fellas, We're Going to Therapy. It's our 10th episode. We're 10 for 10. Every Wednesday, they're going to keep coming to you. We're committed. And if you aren't doing the service of following us on social media, Instagram primarily, we're also doing separate daily social media content. Listener asked questions, coping skills examples, content rec. So slide on over to the Instagram page at Get In Fellas Pod. We'd be happy to have you. Also noting, a new batch of shirts came in with a new design, designed by our producer, Mr. Richie Davidowski. If you're just listening to this and not watching, they're lavender and a little teal, and they rock. Kinder, gentler bro, slapped right on the front. If you need a shirt, holler at me. You got to be caught up on the episodes. This week, we're going to start with a little tangent. Nothing to do with anything except the crazy idea I had about 12 years ago called the movie ratings theory of dating. Single, not single. It's worth a listen. It's kind of silly. We're then going to switch into breaking down the tape with Rams head coach Sean McVay, teaching us lessons about honesty, vulnerability, and accountability. My guy, one of my best friends on this whole planet, Chef Max Wertheim, coming on to discuss distress tolerance. We're going to hit things like why ADHD affects that, smoking cessation, and most importantly, how to keep your cool if you feel like you're going to lose your stack. Finally, the Olympics wrapped up this week, and so we're going to honor the GOAT Olympian of all time, and of course, a Bro Motions Hall of Fame worthy person, Mr. Michael Phelps. All right, y'all, let's go. All right, welcome to session 10, y'all. Big celebratory week for session 10. I want to start off a little off track today because I was at a social event last night and just started talking about dating with some people. And one of my favorite non-scientific, this is not meant for JAMA, more like for Cosmo, things and theories to talk about dating came up. We're going to put ourselves in the mindset for when I came up with the movie ratings theory of dating. The year's like 2014. Your boy is fresh on the dating scene at age 24 for the first time since age 18. And Tinder is fresh, new. That's the beginning of dating apps for some of you younger folk. I had this thought of you can love somebody whose interests are really different than yours. You might live your life at different speeds, and inevitably there comes some judgment, there comes some difficulties when you live your life at different speeds, your social life. I like to call this kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You could think of it as introversion versus extroversion, how you like to spend your free time. It can go a number of different directions. The movie ratings is based on a 5-point Likert scale. We're going to shout out the creator of Likert scale, Renessis Likert, who is an American psychologist. Any psychologist, we're going to shout out. And these are common. You see these all the time. The most common 5-point Likert scale that you would use is anytime you fill out like a satisfaction survey, you're going to rate it from strongly disagree all the way up to strongly agree. So back to the movie ratings, G, PG, PG-13, R, and X. And these are all for you to define however you want, however you see it. Things that I think about when I'm looking at these are G, maybe no substance use, maybe waiting for sex until marriage. They like to stay home more. They're not out in social as much. Those are different things, different to define. PG moves up into alcohol drinking, PG-13 into marijuana and maybe some one-night stands. R gets more intense, and then X gets into wherever your mind goes. Right. So we know these movie ratings, and the thoughts I've had on it are free to be challenged by anybody listening to this. I don't think this is gender specific, but what I found is when you're two levels apart from each other, a little bit of science behind this, not dating science, just science and research. When you're 2 points, away from each other, it's really hard to reconcile that because somebody's probably not going to want to join you on your things that are either more intense or less intense. And it's a working theory, y'all. I'm open to changes. If Cosmo is listening, I think we could really expand on this and throw it in there because it's not one of the more scientific things I'm going to throw out in this podcast. So just really wanted to get off my chest because I think it's fun. And I do think it can be a fun framework if you're out in the dating world and thinking about mutual interests. Might not be the way to think about it. It might be mutual speeds at which you live your social life that we want to find compatible. All right, y'all, we're going to switch into breaking down the tape next and learn from Sean McVay. See you soon. Hey, y'all, thanks for joining for Breaking Down the Tape. We're going to dip back into the Pardon My Take well. If you hadn't realized, it's a really important podcast to me and a lot of other AWLs that are also KGBs. We'd love to see more and more of you. Before we dive into Sean McVay's interview with the boys, I want to talk about a few weeks ago. Chef Max, who's going to be on this episode here in a minute to talk about distress tolerance, plus two other KGBs, my friends from Ohio, Teacher Max and Teacher Sam, got the benefit of going to Pup Punk, which is the Barstool Sports kind of pop punk band that they chore around a little bit. They're all also in the media full-time themselves. Great people. Had a great time. We were fortunate enough to stay committed to sticking around after the show, and they just did a meet and greet. There was nobody left at the show. So the four of us basically just got one-on-one time with all these people, PFT, Roan, Caroline, Robbie, Frankie, everybody in the band, and it was awesome. Super duper duper awesome. They were all really cool. Roan became our 10th TikTok follower till I die. Let's keep him there. And I got to sit one-on-one with PFT for a good 15, 20 minutes. It was a great time. They know how much this show means to us and that the format of this show is taken from a lot of the things they do. Topics with PFT included, what's it like to be a therapist? I told him that after Big Cat and PFT saying they have the best job in the world, that I'm a close second. I love being a psychiatrist. I love and appreciate learning everything that I've learned and now being able to share it all with you. And, that boys are more likely to share feelings when they throw a football around, as he was telling me. And then Letterkenny had that trope when the boys are all tossing the baseball around. So we just talked about growth and some of the personal growth that we've seen over the now almost 10 years that they've been doing Pardon My Take, as a lot of these guys have gotten older and grown and changed. Been in therapy themselves, they talk about and those kinds of things. So super duper cool. I think if people haven't given Barstool a shot in a long time, it's much, much different than people perceive. And really important, again, to me and the direction I would see this podcast going and how to speak to young men who might not otherwise want to touch on therapy and the topics we're working on here. So back to the boys. Sean McVay, head coach of the St. Louis Rams. No, the Los Angeles Rams, who did take down my Bengals in the 2021 Super Bowl, which was super sad face. Still not over it. But Sean's a good dude. Notably, he got his head coaching job with the Rams at age 30, making him the youngest NFL head coach at the time and maybe ever in the Common Era. So Sean teaches us a few things here. I want to set up the first clip. We're gonna share just Spotify, just the audio. You can certainly find them on YouTube if you want to watch the video and talk about. We're framing this as the middle of a conversation where they talk about Sean, who is an attractive dude, the fact that he's been working out in a certain way, and then they dive into a certain topic.
And the facial hair looks good.
Facial hair looks great.
I'm embarrassed to admit I had to get PRP for that.
Did you?
Oh.
It looks a little fuller. I was stressed. My beard, I was getting, I don't know if you want to say alopecia, but it was getting thin.
Yeah. You got shots in your face?
Absolutely did.
Okay.
You know what? Here's how it started,
I gotta
though.
get that.
I'll give you this. This is how it started. I'm so LA now. So a couple years ago at the draft house, they got this over-the-top shot. You go back to the year that Puka Nacua was drafted. They want to show this. They're showing these where we're talking about the vision for Puka, all that stuff. I'm just, selfishly looking at my hairline like, what the fuck is going on with this
find
thing?
out, yeah.
All I'm seeing is bald.
Mm-hmm.
And actually Raheem Morris's daughter, Malia, she always used to say, you are balding. And I thought she was just joking with me. So I told my wife, I said, why didn't you tell me I'm actually going bald? And the back of my head looked terrible. So I started getting PRP shots there.
Smart.
Starting to come in, I'm feeling good about that. And I said, why the hell not the beard?
Yeah.
So, and you believe, are you just saying that? Or you
No,
think
it does look good.
If he's going to get this, he's probably going to Google it right now.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure pain when you do it.
Yeah. So I got it like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And it bought me a couple years, but now it's going again.
So you did the PRP?
I did it on the top of my head. Yeah. It bought me a couple years.
Let me see.
Oh no, it's bad now. It's a disaster back there right now.
It's not great.
But the PR, it hurts when they put it in.
The lady said though, if the healthier you are, and if you still have some hair growth, the more likely it is to actually work.
So just to boys talking about using hair regrowth products. Sean starts by saying that he's embarrassed by it, but Izzy seems pretty comfortable talking about it. It's a guy who takes care of himself. Talked about the stress causing alopecia in his beard, maybe the hair loss too. So he's a big guy that speaks regularly on mental health and has been on many podcasts and in media talking about mental health and the importance of seeking treatment for that kind of stuff. So I will say this humbly, as two of the three members of this podcast staff, it's not the producer with the great head of hair, use hair regrowth products himself. So something we could all share, something we can talk about, right? That's a big part of aging, and it's a challenge for men, just like there are aspects of aging that are challenging for both men and women across the board. So thought that was really cool, Sean, to be able to be honest and open up that conversation. PFT has not shied away from talking about going bald on Pardon My Take. So that was not new for him. We're going to skip ahead. All right, we jump back in with the boys here. Your backstory is they're asking Sean about a question they ask all coaches, which was Matt LaFleur, what do you do on 3rd and 8 and then 4th down decision in the playoffs a handful of years ago against Tom Brady and the Bucs. So Sean was talking about that with them. They talk about how regular Joes are better at football clock management than the coaches now because video games, Madden taught them. So we're jumping in here to see Sean in the middle of asking them, hey, boys, how would you have handled that? And we'll go from there. Sean teaches us a good lesson about accountability following this little joshing session.
Let me ask you this. So how would you guys have played 3rd and 8 to 4th and 8?
3rd 8 to 4th and 8?
Yeah.
I probably would have run the ball.
Yeah.
Run the ball on 3rd down.
Yeah.
Make it manageable.
And I you know what? I can't say that I don't think that's a sound thought process.
Yeah, that's what I know Army does that. Well, they run the ball anyways, but when they plan out their scenarios, they just anticipate, okay, we're going to go for it on 4th down, like almost every time.
Yeah.
So we treat it like it's 1st and 8 every time.
That's how a lot of these teams do handle it. If you know you're going to get to a certain thing, so you can play some percentages, do it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We have zero accountability for anything. So we do get to feel smart when we come out on the right side of it. But nothing gets me more upset as a fan than if a coach makes a mistake and then they just dig in on it afterwards and they don't admit that it was a mistake. And they don't learn from it. So there are probably a lot of Rams fans listening right now. They're like, well, at least,
No, you took accountability right away.
He's moving forward.
Yeah.
No, you know what, though? If we tell our players that, like, all kidding aside, if we're saying, all right, let's have accountability be one of the most important things. And it's hard for us to move on if we can't acknowledge, like, all right, where we're wrong.
Right.
And let's be selfless and secure enough to be able to admit that. And if I'm asking something of our players, then I better be willing to do it. And then there are some times when you say some things didn't go down, but was the thought process sound?
Yeah.
And usually when I get the most, when I get mad at myself, or when you're saying, all right, you didn't either think about this beforehand, you didn't play it right in terms of the sequencing of what led up to that 4th down, or sometimes it doesn't go down for you.
A little Josh in there about the play call. PFT jumps in and says, hey, we're fans. We get angry at the coaches, but we don't have to take any accountability, and points out that there's really nothing worse than when a coach is supposed to be the leader of the team, doesn't take accountability for play calls or things. Really, they're the manager, they're the captain of the whole ship. So anything should come on them. And Sean, very rightly, he's a big-time players coach, which means the players really love him, said, yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. You need to be able to be secure enough to take accountability, which is an important word, because secure implies that you're not going to be thrown off. You're not going to become angry or anxious when someone asks you to take accountability for your actions, which is a lesson we all could learn. So I just wanted to shout that out because that's a great life lesson for us all to learn, which is, hey, if you mess up, you need to be able to be honest and open about it and say, you're right. That was on me. I'm going to learn what I can learn from this and try and do better the next time. So appreciate all y'all hanging in for another BDTT with the PMT boys. And super stoked to get another AWL/KGB into the interview. We'll be right back with Chef Max to learn the very useful skill of distress tolerance. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining for week 3 of Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. I'm thrilled, stoked, overjoyed to be joined by one of my closest friends on this planet. That is your boy, Chef Max Worthon. Thanks for having us. Thanks for joining us today, Max.
Hey, what's up, bro?
Yo, what's up, bro? So Chef Max, a man who needs no introduction to probably half this audience, but I knew Chef Max from my fraternity at Ohio State. He then went on to become a chef. He grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. His favorite sports teams are the Cavs, Guardians, and Browns, also Buckeyes, of course. Max's claim to athletic fame is that he was in the high school band, Cleveland Heights High Band, with Jason Kelce, otherwise known as Taylor Swift's brother-in-law. So, if anything, Max may not have played professional sports, but he's like 6 degrees of separation from Taylor Swift, and I think that counts. Max is actually He's starting a new restaurant venture in Columbus, out in Worthington, as a northern suburb called Stacked Burger Company. Really make good food. It's been awesome to watch them grow and shift business models here at this point. In his free time, Max enjoys cooking, Netflix binges, and taking his dog Rogue on a nice stroll for a good cup of neighborhood coffee. How's that sound, Max?
That's a pretty good summary of my whole life.
Doing good. So Max, what's been your experience in therapy?
I have some experience, I think, starting somewhere in middle school, and I couldn't tell you the exact date. I want to say maybe 7th grade, when, parents and teachers, me not sitting still in class, not paying attention, all those things. So I started seeing a therapist and was tested for ADD and ADHD, which,
he was rip-roaringly positive for, and I can say as one of his best friends, he remains rip-roaringly positive for.
Yes, definitely.
It's unmedicated these days, folks. It's a handful.
I think it's a big reason of what I do and
Absolutely.
cooking. It's there's a lot of different stimulations all happening at once, and you can't pay attention to anything for too long. There's a million things going on, so it's all very entertaining to me.
Totally. I think it makes a lot of sense, right? We often, ideally we find our ways into jobs and careers that suit our temperaments, right? So, and Max was also talking about one of his other favorite things to do is clean. But similarly, right, it gives you something to do. It can be a mindful activity, cleaning, like we learned about last week. And so that's just a unique thing for him. Max, it's interesting to go to therapy for ADHD. We're learning organization skills. Sometimes we're learning social skills, when to don't interrupt a conversation. What's the pacing? What do you think you took from those years?
I think a lot of good stuff. I think there was some negative. I think internally a lot of don't interrupt, and my friends will still tell me that I interrupt a lot.
I did that a few weeks ago when Max was visiting me here in Denver.
And my girlfriend, it's a constant source of conversation, not of disagreement, just of something that we talk about in our lives. But I always think that at some point I was a lot more talkative than I am now, which is hard to believe for many people. I don't know if that's good or bad. I just think it's my brain has changed over time because of some of these things that I learned in therapy. But it feels like at one point I was different, but we all grow also. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, kind of some maturity and just learning, right? We learn how to behave over time because we get feedback constantly from the people around us in those situations, right? So we're really learning and growing all the time, especially when you're in middle school and high school. Those are probably going to be the peak of when those behaviors are going to get in your way. So will pit stop here. It's been a pleasure to say this with most of my guests so far. Max and his girlfriend, Jenny, great communication. I stay with them all the time when I go visit Ohio. It's been a pleasure to watch them to grow all these years. So to shout out Max also, he has been my daily phone call best friend through all of medical school and residency. We lived together before I went to med school. We lived together for my 3rd and 4th year. And since I got to Denver, we talk on the phone basically every day. Jenny refers to me as his other girlfriend. So Max is basically a psychiatrist. He needs and hasn't been and needs to go to his own therapy like any of us. Though, again, great communication with his partner. I've got no complaints. But when you've listened to me go on and on and on about every step of the process, I mean, what are you, Max? 60, 70% of a shrink? His sister was a social worker. It's right there.
Yeah. And my mom worked in special education for her whole career. But
your dad's a nonprofit.
60% a psychiatrist. I tell people that you say that. I like to disagree.
I do say it.
I may have learned a few things along the way, but I also know that I am nowhere near a complete understanding of anything that Steve does. And what he does is study from following him and helping him even read flashcards where I couldn't pronounce any of the names on the flashcards that were in Latin. Yeah. And so I know I'm not a doctor.
Studying for step 1. Yeah. Me and Slepian and you were having study tables over on North High across from the GE. So good stuff, man. So Either way, Max and I are really close friends, and it's been one of those friendships that have developed a lot since we were teenagers. Max, we're going to be doing distress tolerance today. Again, guys, that's the second module of this DBT block we're doing. How do you think your distress tolerance skills are, Max? And do you think you engage in any maladaptive or non-healthy distress tolerance or coping skills?
So I think my stress tolerance skills vary depending on the situations I'm in. I'd say at work, I have amazing stress tolerance skills, but that's something I've developed over many years in the kitchen. Whereas when I first started, everyone around me could see when the stress was building because I was letting it out on everyone around me.
Totally.
And
Really stressful job in the kitchen of any sort, right? We've seen the bear.
But at the
He's
end of the
basically
day,
Carmi from the bear.
at the end of the day, at a certain point, I understand, what I'm doing here. I'm making cheeseburgers. I'm making tacos. I'm not performing heart surgery. And if I do one thing wrong, no one's going to die, assuming I'm following health procedures.
That's good. A little salmonella never hurt anybody, or really it has. And what's interesting, Max, is over time you've become a manager, and a manager of young people, right? So Max and I talk a lot about his employees and substance use, people who've been incarcerated, trauma, right? And so it's been really interesting to support Max through, what do I do with this person, right? One guy you thought was like manicky, another using ketamine on the job. I mean, you've seen some wild stuff.
Yeah, we've had. I mean, it's been eye-opening to me because I'd always worked for smaller businesses where we only had, a few other employees other than myself. And, as we've grown as a business and are continuing to grow, we've had all sorts of different people come in and work for us for various amounts of time and with varying amounts of success.
That's humans.
We've had, we had someone that was living in a sober living house when he started to work for us. And he had plenty of his own issues, but he desperately wanted to get out of there and was willing to, work as hard as he had to at our job to make that happen. Now, whether that was a good decision for him, he may have been better off in the sober living house long term and continuing his daily therapy and things like that. But it was amazing to give someone the opportunity that was able to succeed with it, at least in the short term. And I've had some updates from some people that are still in touch with him, even though he no longer works for us, and has had some setbacks. That he's maintained his apartment and he's maintained a living work, and although it's been a couple different places, he's been able to hold on to all that, which had been a struggle.
Awesome. Addiction and sobriety. It's tough. We'll do addiction stuff here down the line, but anybody knows, if you've had someone in your life who struggled with substance use or other kinds of addiction, that getting out of those cycles is really hard, and maintaining that sobriety is damn near impossible. Speaking of which, Max, any maladaptive skills cycles that you've had a hard time getting out of?
My struggles with nicotine over the years, and although I like to blame the field that I work in for that, vaping, smoking, all those different kinds of ways of getting nicotine. I did it before I worked in the culinary field. I've done it in hiatuses from the culinary field. So clearly there's something there that's not just, this is my profession and it's a high stress profession, and this is a way to get away from it for a little bit, even though that plays a factor as well.
Yeah, it's multifactorial. And you brought up, as we were talking about prepping for this interview, that ADHD folks have a harder time kicking nicotine. And it makes sense because it's more helpful for them than it is for people without ADHD. So I haven't touched a lot on medications yet, but I'll sprinkle it in here and there. So if you have ADHD, the reason you respond well to a stimulant is because it slows your brain down, or I tell patients that it shifts down in gear, right? If you do not have ADHD and you smoke cigarettes, do cocaine, someone else's Adderall, caffeine, you feel like you're shifting up in gear, right? So, Bro Motions podcast, I talk with patients about ADHD all the time. And I say the most diagnostic thing you can tell me when I ask you if you've done cocaine is, oh yeah, in college, all my friends used to bump their chest and talk at each other a mile a minute. I'd go read a book under a tree. So Max, there's a reason that nicotine, it's hard to say it's a quote excuse, but it's hard. It's very hard for people with that kind of temperament because it really does help slow you down. And I think we just know in general, nicotine is just a motherfucker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's something about the structure that it adds to my day, in some senses where I can, knowing like I can have a nicotine break or a cigarette break or whatever it is for 5 minutes, and I can build my work schedule, my home schedule, whatever it is around me looking forward to that break, that I'm going to, or once I give myself this break, I'm going to accomplish X, Y, and Z after. Is like, I've rewarded myself, so I have to do something to earn it or things of that nature. So I find ways of, I don't know, convincing myself that it's a positive thing in my, and to some extent it helps keep me focused on the next task.
Yeah, it's mental organization, right? Again, you have a stressful job. It's good to take a second. It makes a lot of sense. So I thought that just made sense. And it's something I would imagine a good percentage of our audience has struggled with in the past or is currently struggling with. Max is not the only one of my close friends who has been, who struggled with nicotine throughout their life. It is a fucking bear. There are things that can help. The gum and the patches have their roles. There are prescription medications you can ask your doctors about that are a lot of help. So any questions, feel free to send those my way. Max, we're going to be talking about distress tolerant skills today. It's hard to convince people that they should want to just tolerate distress. And it makes sense because feeling stress sucks ass. And so we're going back to our workbook, no dinosaurs yet, but the question is why? Why should we tolerate pain and feelings and negative urges? Because pain is part of life. We get in really bad shape, and this looks a lot like addictions of many kinds, substance, sex, gambling, eating disorders, when we use behaviors to avoid, avoidance is a dirty word, those negative feelings. So if you can't deal with that pain, you may end up acting impulsively. And when you act impulsively, things get worse. You can hurt yourself, hurt others, or you're not going to get what you want, right? If we don't think this out, if we don't use our wise mind, when we talk about tolerating distress, Max, do you think there's times where you actively know you're avoiding a feeling and you're just...
As I've gotten older, I feel like I've tried to pay more attention to my negative feelings and why I'm having them, why I'm feeling them, and trying to gauge whether, I guess, their validity. I don't know if there's a better word for that, but
well, all of our feelings are valid, Max. Validating ourself is important. But whether or not maybe it's whether or not you're having cognitive distortions, right? Whether what the things you're feeling are true, and whether it's not just kind of our life experiences and those kinds of things help running away from us. Yes. I know that myself, when I'm avoiding something negative, it still looks like anger. Again, that is what it looks like for most men, as we know. And it's this feeling of it's fucking bullshit, right? And that's kind of a thing that men come back to when they don't want to accept reality, that this is fucking bullshit. We throw temper tantrums, we break shit, we drink alcohol, we end up in all those patterns. Those are things that men tend to do when they're having a hard time tolerating distress. So some straightforward things that people can do. We're going to go over a handful of, you could call them coping skills. We're going to call them survival skills, but crisis survival skills is what the book here calls them. I'm going to share. Here we go. So we're not going to spend a lot of time here on something that a lot of therapists will teach their patients is 5 senses. Here they use 6 to include movement, but it really is, there's lots of great examples here on the screen. I hope everybody's watching. A great couples activity to watch the show together I've been pitching to people, but we might do something, say 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, right? So doing that in that nice way allows you to be mindful of your senses, and knowing that having sensory-based adults in here, hopefully, and if you need help, we're happy to help and give more examples, but we're able to kind of get ourselves back to neutral, okay, and work on some of these higher level skills. One of the things that we don't think to do when we're struggling with big emotions or when we're considering acting impulsively that's not something we consider for very long, but there are moments, is doing pros and cons. Max, do you think you do pros and cons a lot, like in your actual day-to-day? Big decisions, we all do pros and cons, but like...
In terms of high stress situations, I don't think that's something that is the first thing that pops into your head, or the first thing that I'm personally thinking about of like, oh, like let me stop and take a beat and start thinking about like...
It's the idea of impulsive behavior. I like take a beat. We say slow it down. Max, it sounds like you were inching towards a situation that happened recently at home where you might not have tolerated as much distress as you needed to.
Yeah, for sure. Specifically, I like in these kinds of... Yes, there was a situation at home.
I already heard about this, so I'm laughing at Max ahead of time.
Yeah, there was a situation at home where it was like a Tuesday or something, and I needed to go to work in the afternoon, and I needed to get my laundry started because I had no clean work clothes. And my washer is finicky and has been for a while, and it does a thing. It's a touch screen, and it does a thing where if it doesn't like the way you touch the screen, it just beeps at you a bunch, and it's really annoying, and it drives me crazy.
Yeah. So this is the crisis you were faced with if you're following along on the worksheet. Max, what were your urges as the intensity of the beeping ramped and the clock ticked towards the start of work and you needing clean clothes? What were your urges?
My urges were that I wanted to break the washing machine. I was
very reasonable. I would probably have felt,
and I was like, it doesn't work. Now I'll break it more. I'm not really sure how that really works.
So we heard the stressors, right? Think about these behavioral chain analyses we did a long time ago with AJ and Grant. You want to think about the predisposing factors that led you to make a choice, right? So Max was up against the clock, needed clean work clothes, didn't want to stink at work and be the stinky kid. And he was frustrated with this piece of technology that it sounds like he's had an ongoing battle with, right? So I see a bunch of reasons that you might have been a little more angry or a little more impatient, a little more impulsive than you would otherwise, right? So if we know, right, that we slow it down, we might make a better choice, we might not hurt ourselves. Max, what did you end up doing, just so the fans at home can know while we go into the pros and cons?
What I ended up doing, well, first I tried, maybe wiping off the screen with a piece of cloth because, it's a touch screen, so maybe it's picking up dust in the air or whatever is stuck to it. I tried checking the latch on the door, making sure that would work.
Good.
Right, I did the things and it was still beeping at me and I'm going crazy. And then finally I punched the touch screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happened after that?
I realized I felt good for a second. And then I realized I was bleeding.
And then he was bleeding.
And I was confused as to why I was bleeding because I thought there's no way I did any damage to the actual screen. And then I looked at it and it turns out I had cracked the plate or glass or whatever it's made out of and scratched up my knuckles. And it's been almost a month and my knuckles still all scratched up. So it's...
Yeah. And so let's think about this from that pros and cons perspective. And again, when you're reflecting on this before, after you've done the impulsive act, it's pretty easy to reflect on the pros and cons. This is much more challenging in the moment, right?
So immediately after, I felt like dumb, felt silly, and a little ashamed of myself for reacting so strongly at an inanimate object. That's a hard word to say.
You've been at Cleveland Heights High. You've thrown finicky. You've been throwing some $4 words. Maybe we'll get up to some fives. And so here on this graph, guys, it's just a pros and cons list like you've ever seen. We use a lot of 2x2 tables in mental health. So acting on the urges, I haven't heard you spit out many pros, Max. You did feel better for a short moment, so we will give you that. You got to discharge that anger for a second. And then the cons, as you listed, were, well, I broke it. I'm bleeding. I feel shameful. I lost the battle to this 2007 model washing machine.
Yeah, and on top of that, I was then worried that I, had indeed broken it worse and was going to need to buy a new one that, would be entirely my responsibility financially, which is reasonable because I'm the one that punched the thing. So like, I was
Yeah.
like, cool, there goes, $500 to buy a new washing machine. This is going to be great. Like I love.
Yeah. So we can see how
Jenny was not happy.
No, Jenny wouldn't have been happy either way, but then she also probably laughed at you, as is Jenny's main thing to do to you. So, but this Max makes up a good point that when we act impulsively, it usually costs us more than it benefits us, right? Money, because impulsivity is often spending of money, relationships, your job, other types of things that allow you to be stable. When we act impulsively, it's rare that we get lucky enough that things break our way. Resisting the crisis urges, Max, if you had been able to continue and use some of your distress tolerance skills, what would have been the positives of resisting the punching urge?
Well, I mean, I ended up, after I punched it, walking away from it for a while, right?
Yeah.
And eventually I had to go back to see if I could get it to work. And of course it did, right? Like after like less than a minute. Like, of course it would.
Right.
So like walking away clearly would have been more beneficial than hurting myself and breaking the thing worse.
And you were able to come back at it with a clear mind, right? So a better space.
My anger had cooled. I soothed myself with some nicotine, I'm pretty sure, in the in-between. Like,
Again, we'll, deep breathing, other healthy habits you can use on the moment. We'll continue to learn here. This is what we're using. It's not, it's very common to use nicotine. I'm not going to shame Max for it on here. So other pros of resisting that urge, you don't have your partner upset with you. You aren't worried about spending money. Your hand doesn't bleed. The window's not cracked. Cons of not punching it. This is kind of how it goes, guys. There's usually not many cons to resisting impulsive urges, right? It tends to be like, yeah, no, that really didn't help. In the moment, you may come up with cons because if you're trying to, let's say, resist the impulsive urge to shoplift, the con of resisting it might be like, well, I don't get this thing I want to steal. Sure, right? We have to balance that with, well, I might do time. It's going to prevent me from getting a job. I will eventually feel shitty unless I'm a total sociopath, all that kind of stuff.
Does it count if it's the self-checkout line at Kroger?
That does count. It does count. Sorry. Max, you admitting to misdemeanor on the camera?
This is all hypothetical conversations.
I'm just, I don't know which Franklin County law enforcement officers are watching the show, but
I'm just saying, tomato could be any kind of tomato. Like we don't know. I'm not a tomato expert.
So it's like you grab the organic tomato, but you bill for the regular Roma tomato.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how these machines work, Steve. I'm not.
We'll make you look better in post, bro. So this is, that's really helpful, right? I think people, again, we use pros and cons lists when we're deciding which job to take, if we're going to propose, those types of things, big money decisions, buying a house, right? Those are things that we use pros and cons lists for. This is the action of using it for smaller moments when we're thinking about making choices that are more impulsive. Not as well thought out. At home, a lot of these acronyms, improve, accepts, and there's just long. I really do like this crisis management skill because it's short, it's easy to remember. Some things we know and some things we don't. Tip skills are meant to be used when our emotions are very high. Okay, you've heard me and Lauren talk about how this can be suicidal thoughts. It can be self-harm. It could be violence of other sorts. Or again, so much anger that you're about to make it worse. That's what I would say would be considered very high. If you're going to go scream at your boss, kick your dog, scream at your partner, things that would be considered real bad, then take these thoughts into consideration, okay? So this example says if your emotional arousal is very high, then your brain is not processing information. You're wholly in your emotional mind. You'd likely be considered emotionally overwhelmed. This is when we recruit our nervous system to help us out, right? Because remember, the fight or flight response is our sympathetic nervous system, and that is what is on overdrive when we're emotionally overwhelmed. TIP, T-I-P-P, for those listeners, temperature. So a lot of people take hot showers. What actually helps people more when they're feeling emotionally overwhelmed is cold. Cold activates the vagal nerve, and the vagal nerve spreads all over your body. It controls our parasympathetic nervous system, and instead of fight or flight, that's rest and digest. right? So it calms us down. So this example, and I like this a lot, is you dip your head in an ice bath. So you know, maybe you won't have that laid out, but you got ice cubes, throw them in a bowl with water, and bang. It's really helpful. It is hard to think about anything else besides being really fucking cold when your head is in water.
Have you ever watched, what was it, Showtime? Pat Riley.
The basketball show?
Pat Riley's always dunking his head in ice water during stressful moments in that show.
Yeah, it's a great call. Great callback. Yeah. I mean, ice baths are all the rage these days. So if anybody here has been doing those ice baths, think like, how much stress can you have while you're thinking about how fucking cold you are? The I in tip is intense exercise. These are short bursts of intense exercise. I am not green lighting maladaptive exercise as a coping skill. We'll get more into maladaptive exercise as we go. But a quick run, boxing, you have punching bags, jump rope, those kinds of things. If we do it for a few minutes, up to 10 minutes, then that really can help when we're feeling that level of overwhelm. 2 P's, paced breathing. We call this box breathing. The keys to box breathing, and these numbers are different for everybody, but you picture almost a rectangle. That's when you breathe in, it's less breaths than when you breathe out. You want to slow it down. So we take 4 breaths in and we breathe out over like 6 seconds. So it's, hope that came through on the airwaves for you guys. So the idea is that we don't force the breath out when you allow it to just gently come out. And please go Google paced breathing, box breathing, other types of breathing exercises. It's the easiest way to help with stress. And as we know, it's always available. You don't need any tools, as we don't with this next one. Max, have you heard of progressive muscle relaxation?
Yeah.
Pretty common. Why do you think of it? What do you do for PMR?
I think it was recommended to me as a way to help myself get ready for sleep while in bed.
Yeah, it's a really good example. A lot of the apps use PMR as part of their sleep routines. Have you ever used it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you have a tape you listen to?
No, I honestly think it was something I started doing in, I want to say like high school or something.
Sure. It's been out there.
I always do. It's something I do when I'm like noticing, I think that I'm like having a hard time falling asleep.
Yeah. The way that I think it is often taught is we clench our hands, we clench our feet, and we relax after 5 seconds of tenseness. Yeah. A lot of the meditation apps will have you tense from head to toe, one muscle group at a time, which is also very nice. It's a nice routine, right? We squish our forehead, we shrug our shoulders, we flex our biceps, our chest, right? We go through that, and we're really allowed to kind of let the stress of the day unwind. So Calm, Headspace, these are all the different meditation apps that I've messed with, patients have messed with, really successful. Usually they're free or cheap. Our last skill for the day is going to be a skill that everybody does, and yet most people do not think of this as a skill. So I want everybody today, if you're taking one thing out of today's interview, as I've asked you to do in every DBT episode, is understand that accepting reality when you'd prefer not to is skillful on its own. There is a big difference between, it is what it is, and being able to say, this really blows. I'm salty about this. And it is what it is. So one of those is more impulsive, and we just have been trained to not get worked up about stuff, especially as men. And one of those is validating, to say, this thing sucks. I don't have the ability to change it. And we accept reality. You think it's easy or hard for you to accept reality, Max? You kind of talked about over the years, it's gotten a little easier.
Yeah. I mean, I recently, trying to open a new restaurant. We ended our lease at our old space in the end of February. And, we're at the time that we were ending the lease, we thought we were pretty locked into a lease already on a new place, only to have it fall through via the landlord. And that had already been the second time that had happened. And it was, upsetting about, to me, for thoughts of my future and what I was going to do in the short term, the long term, all those things.
It's unsettling, right? And a lot of that stuff's out of your control. Construction, contracts, getting equipment in, all those things. A lot of it's out of your control.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a lot of things that just happen. Things with city inspections and paperwork, and it goes at its own pace, and you can't really control it. Even when you pay to expedite things, it just is what it is, and you have to be willing to I can't let that fester in me the entire time this has been going on for the last 6 months.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of festering.
A miserable human being for 6 months straight, and no one would like me.
I love you, Max. I will continue to validate you, as is the depth of our friendship. This is especially of important skill for, we've talked about problem-solving type parents, or again, parents or people who might act on impulsive urges. You see up top, 5 ways that we can handle a situation when a serious problem comes our way. Serious problem specifically that we don't like. If we like it, it's not a problem. We figure out how to solve the problem. Number 1, we know a lot of fixers. We talked about the engineer type dads. We know a lot of people's roles when they see someone in distress or there's a problem is they try and fix it. Number 2 is we invalidate our own experience and we change how we feel about the problem. We sugarcoat it, we're defended, we lie to ourselves, or we just say that it is what it is without allowing ourselves to feel the proper emotions. Number 3, this is the healthy way I'm going to push you towards, which is accepting the situation as it is. Number 4, you can see this is on a spectrum as DBT always is we don't do anything and we just bitch and moan and say this is fucking bullshit. Before I've worked very hard on my skills, that was my go-to. Number 5, we make things worse by doing something stupid. We don't like the task our boss just gave us, and instead of taking a breath, going for a walk, using some skills and saying, hey, I need this job right now, maybe not in the future, I cannot go blow up on my boss. But if you jump down your boss's throat, guess what? You're going to get fired. Nobody's going to be happy. Yeah, so if that's not enough of a reason to make you think that really, truly, that accepting reality is skillful, because we know somewhere deep down in our hearts that rejecting reality or dipping our head, dipping our head in the sand is not helpful. We know that changing our reality is not possible unless we first accepted that it's really happening. We know that when we reject reality, it makes our situations worse. You stay miserable or you do dumb things. And when we refuse to accept reality, we're just kind of a miserable cuss. And I think any of us can feel that. If you're just stewing and stewing over a thing that you have no control of, it's a bad vibe. Real bad vibe. So again, think of this as skillful. It really helps you not really say, why me, which is very common. I think, Max, I'm sure you've been in a situation where this is bullshit, and our mind gets to that point of it's personal. We tend to personalize things if we don't like them, when really it just is what it is. Yeah. So we talk about being stuck. Oftentimes being stuck leads to very negative emotions. Acceptance is a choice in this type of scenario, right? We're often given things we don't want to accept, and you have the choice to accept this or you reject it. Things that stop us from getting in the way of accepting these situations we don't want to be in, our beliefs get in the way. There's something, it could be our upbringing, our religion, things like that, that if you accept this painful situation, you may be weak, you're giving up, or you're willing to accept this thing, and that's a sign of weakness, especially in men. If they don't go fight somebody, if they don't go, scream or do those maladaptive things, then they were soft, they were weak. Our emotions also get in the way, and it makes a lot of sense. That's why we have to go and take a breath. We can't just accept reality right off if it's really driven our emotional experience to new heights. So we make sure that our emotions are in control so that we can make good choices like accepting reality. Max, I think you gave a great example of the restaurant is not going as fast as you'd like. Of course, it's frustrating because your future is in, a blurrier state than you might like. And it is skillful for Max to say it is what it is. I want the homework this week, y'all, is going to be on accepting reality. You can see this worksheet here. And also the next is going to be a situation in which you had to accept reality and remind yourself that it was not easy to do. And hopefully you can see you're rating your distress both before and after, that we can watch our distress tolerance and our distress levels lower. I will say this as I was a teacher. I very much advocate for DBT homework. If anybody wants to just send it over when they're done because they need somebody to say good job and a pat on the head, I'm here for it. Big fan. Would love to.
How many stickers do I get?
I got a lot of stickers, man. There's a lot of stickers. Now, if you mean little gold star stickers or the 5,000 new logos of the podcast that I just ordered. So it's going to be a lot of stickers coming to Ohio. Max, it's great for coming, man. Really, really appreciate our friendship over the years. It's been so great. All right, Max, boy. Thanks for your time. This was great. Look forward to chopping it up again soon. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the Bro Motions Hall of Fame Inductee of the Week. As you already heard, we're going to honor the Olympics by referencing and inducting one of the GOATs of Olympians of all time, and certainly the broest of Bro Motional Hall of Fame candidates from Olympic fame of Michael Phelps, most decorated Olympian of all time, the GOAT. Many would say 28 total medals, and he has all-time records in 23 events. Pretty crazy. Now, let's point out that this is worth it. We're making a one-time exception for a University of Michigan graduate. We're not going to do that much on this show. Michael didn't technically graduate. He took classes while he was there, training with his coach who got hired by the University of Michigan. So it's close. It's close, but I want everybody to listen up. That means no Tom Brady, no Jim Harbaugh, no Gerald Ford. We may come back to you, Iggy Pop, because you also dropped out to kickstart your music career. So it's right on the border. Michael Phelps, though, as we know, has been a guy who's been speaking out on mental health issues since the year 2015, talking about his depression and the struggles of imposter syndrome and being a world-famous athlete as he's been. He's been encouraging people to talk about their issues in public and speaking frequently to children and other organizations. In fact, his foundation, the Michael Phelps Foundation, does a lot of things. Their main focus is with the Nemours Hospital system and teaching people how to raise resilient children, partnering Michael and his wife along with different doctors, psychologists, and people who work with children there. Michael's also been in 2 documentaries that feature mental health themes. The movie Angst was meant to bring awareness and generate conversations about anxiety, and has also been taken into the California public education system, which we know we're going to love. We got to get this stuff in schools. And the other one was called The Weight of Gold, which talks about the hidden struggles of Olympic athletes. Though now with Simone and these other people discussing things, hopefully it becomes less and less hidden. Michael, though, was certainly somebody who paved the way to be talking about these things, especially at his fame level. So, Michael, we want to give you a shout and thank you for joining us in the Bro Motions Hall of Fame. It was a great Olympics. USA basketball got the win. All sorts of good stuff. All right, we'll be back to cite our sources and wrap up. Howdy, y'all. Finally, time to wrap up the show as we do as scientists with citing our sources. If you hop on the link tree at any point, you'll see that I've updated all the learning materials, even those yet to come, from our DBT for Adolescents workbook. Again, I go back to it all the time to work with patients. I found it very helpful myself. Homework or no homework, rereading things is always a great way to learn. I also want to thank Pardon My Take and Spotify for letting us borrow a little bit of inspiration from Coach Sean McVay and the boys. Thanks, Chef Max, again for coming on, and want to shout out Stack Burger Company, another KGB. Jordan Lamatrice and Max have been working together in Columbus for food for a long time. Their new venture is going to be out in Worthington and looking to open shop, brick and mortar restaurant in mid-September. So when you're in Columbus, if you're in Columbus listening to this, give them a shot next month. Finally, the Michael Phelps Foundation speaks for itself. We're going to put their website up on here if you want to click from here, or just Google Michael Phelps Foundation. You'll be able to find it. So thanks, y'all. We're going to mix it up this week. Let's huddle up. Honor the new shirts that we're swagging hard. Let's go KGBs on 3. 1, 2, 3. KGBs. We'll see you next week to learn about emotion regulation.